I am Victoria Sterling, 32 years old, and for the last 3 years I have played the role of the quiet, supportive housewife to perfection. To the outside world, I am just the woman standing in the shadow of a rising tech CEO. In reality, I am a strategic angel investor holding the majority stake in the very company my husband thinks he built alone. I keep my power hidden, much like a loaded gun in a velvet purse, waiting for the right moment to pull the trigger. That moment arrived last Saturday at the Bennett Tech Annual Gala. Jessica, my husband's 24-year-old executive assistant, swirled her glass of expensive Merlot and looked me up and down with undisguised contempt in the middle of the crowded ballroom. She took a step closer, invading my personal space, and smirked. "No wonder he works late, so often avoiding going home," she said loud enough for the circle of junior executives to hear. They snickered. I did not flinch. I did not cry. Instead, I smiled the kind of sweet, dangerous smile a shark gives before it bites. I leaned in and whispered one simple question into her ear very quietly. Her confident expression cracked immediately like glass. The color drained from her face, leaving her pale and trembling. She avoided me the entire rest of the night, hiding in corners and leaving early without saying goodbye. She thought she was the hunter, but she had no idea she was taunting the owner of the forest. Before we watch exactly how I made her world crumble, hit that subscribe button if you believe that silence is often the loudest warning. Let us go back to where the nightmare began just 5 minutes before she made the biggest mistake of her life. The revolving doors of the Ritz-Carlton spun us into the warm, golden glow of the lobby. Outside, the Chicago winter wind was biting, but inside the air smelled of expensive perfume and old money. I stood next to Julian, my husband of 5 years, adjusting the strap of my dress. It was a vintage piece, hand-stitched by a master tailor in Milan, made of black silk, so rare it felt like water against my skin. It had no sequins, no logos, and no flash. To the untrained eye, it was just a plain black dress. And Julian certainly had an untrained eye. He adjusted his bow tie in the reflection of a brass pillar, barely looking at me. "Try to blend in tonight, Tori," he muttered, checking his Rolex. "These are serious investors. Don't bore them with your domestic stories or your gardening hobbies. Just smile and nod." I tightened my grip on my clutch. My gardening hobby was actually managing a portfolio of green energy stocks that outperformed his company's revenue last quarter, but he never asked, so I never told. Before I could respond, a shrill voice cut through the ambient jazz music. "Julian." There you are. It was Jessica. She was coming down the grand staircase wearing a red sequined gown that screamed for attention. It was cut low enough to be unprofessional and high enough to be scandalous for a corporate gala. Julian's face transformed instantly. The annoyance he showed me vanished, replaced by a charming, eager grin. "Jessica." "You look stunning," he said, stepping away from me to greet her with a kiss on the cheek that lingered a second too long. They stood together, a perfect glowing pair, while I stood 3 feet away like a stranger. Jessica beamed, basking in his attention. "Thanks, boss. I wanted to make sure we made a splash tonight." She finally turned her eyes toward me. The warmth left her face. "Oh, hi, Victoria. I didn't see you there. You blend into the background so well in that simple dress. Is it from the outlet mall?" "It's cute. It is bespoke," I said calmly, but she had already turned back to Julian. "Here, take this," Julian said, peeling off his cashmere overcoat and tossing it at me without looking. "Check it at the cloakroom, will you? Jessica and I need to do a preliminary round with the board members. We can't keep them waiting." I caught the heavy coat before it hit the floor. The weight of the wool felt like the weight of my marriage, heavy, suffocating, and entirely one-sided. I watched them walk away, Jessica's hand resting possessively on his forearm. She glanced back at me over her shoulder, a look of triumph in her eyes. She thought I was the dowdy wife, the anchor dragging down the brilliant CEO. She had no clue that the only reason Julian was standing in this room, the only reason he had a company to run, was because I had quietly funded his startup dreams with my inheritance 5 years ago through a shell company. I walked to the cloakroom, the silk of my dress rustling softly. The girl at the counter looked at me with pity as I handed over the coat. "Name?" she asked. I almost said Victoria Sterling, the name on the trust fund that paid for this entire party. But I stopped. "Mrs. Bennet," I said quietly. "Just Mrs. Bennet." I took the claim check and turned back to the party. The room was filled with people drinking champagne. I paid for celebrating a success I engineered, fawning over a man who treated me like a servant. I took a deep breath. Tonight was not just a party. It was an inspection. And Julian and Jessica were failing miserably. I began to make my way through the crowd, not to find my husband, but to find the one man in this room who actually knew the truth. I approached the gilded registration desk, where two young women in matching black cocktail dresses were managing the guest list. One of them was furiously typing on an iPad, while the other was adjusting a floral arrangement that I knew cost $400 because I had approved the invoice 3 weeks ago. The air around the entrance was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and anticipation. I stood patiently waiting for an acknowledgement. The woman with the iPad finally looked up, her eyes glazing over me with practiced indifference. "Name?" she asked, her voice flat and bored. She did not smile. To her, I was clearly just another obstacle between her and the end of her shift. "Victoria Bennet," I replied softly. She tapped on the screen, her long acrylic nails making a sharp clicking sound against the glass. She swiped up. She swiped down. Then she frowned, a tiny crease appearing between her perfectly shaped eyebrows. She looked at me again, this time with a hint of suspicion. "I am not seeing a Victoria Bennet on the VIP list," she said. "Are you sure you're in the right place? This is the Bennet Tech Gala. It is a private event." I felt a familiar coldness settle in my chest. Of course my name was not on the VIP list. I had personally reviewed the initial guest list 2 weeks ago. My name had been at the very top, right next to Julian's. But Julian must have had the final version edited. He had likely told his assistant to clean up the list, and in his world, a wife who stayed at home was not a very important person. She was barely a person at all. "Check under Julian Bennet," I said, keeping my voice steady. My hands were clasped loosely in front of me, resting against the black silk of my dress. Inside, my pulse was hammering, not from fear, but from a simmering rage that I was learning to control with frightening precision. The girl tapped again. "Oh." Her tone shifted, but not to one of respect. It was the tone reserved for luggage or lost items. "Here it is. Julian Bennet, CEO. +1. +1. I was not even named." After 5 years of marriage, after pouring millions into the infrastructure of this company, after saving Julian from bankruptcy twice before he even knew he was in danger, I was reduced to a generic placeholder. I was a quantity, not an identity. "Okay, you are just the +1, she said, dropping the professional facade entirely. She looked past me to a group of men in tuxedos approaching the desk. "Look, the system is flagging this entry because Mr. Bennet has already checked in with a guest. His badge has been scanned." That would be Jessica. She had walked in on his arm, likely breezing past security with the confidence of someone who belonged. "I am his wife," I stated. It was not a plea. It was a fact. The receptionist let out a short, impatient sigh. She picked up a laminated card that read, "Security Protocol." "Ma'am, I cannot just let people in because they claim to be family. Mr. Bennet is already inside with his party. If you are not on the primary list and the +1 slot is filled, I cannot issue you a badge." The group of men behind me cleared their throats. I could feel their eyes boring into my back. The humiliation was physical, a heat rising up my neck. This girl, who probably made $20 an hour, was wielding her tiny amount of power to shame the woman who effectively signed her paycheck. "So what do you suggest I do?" I asked. She waved her hand vaguely toward a velvet rope off to the side near the coat check. "You will need to stand over there and wait. I can try to radio someone from Mr. Bennett's team to come out and verify you. But right now you are blocking the flow of confirmed guests. Please step aside. Please step aside." The words hung in the air. I looked at her name tag, Tiffany. I memorized it instantly. I looked at the security guard standing a few feet away, who was now watching me with his hand resting near his belt, ready to escort the crazy lady out if she made a scene. I did not make a scene. I did not demand to speak to a manager. I did not scream that I owned the building, the event company, and the catering service. I simply nodded. "Very well," I said. I moved to the side, standing behind the velvet rope like a rejected fan trying to glimpse a celebrity. The humiliation was total. The men in tuxedos brushed past me, handing their invitations to Tiffany, who beamed at them with a bright, welcoming smile. "Welcome, gentlemen. Right this way. Enjoy the evening." From my vantage point in the shadows, I had a perfect view of the ballroom entrance. I could see the chandeliers sparkling. I could hear the clinking of glasses. I was on the outside looking in exactly where Julian and his family always wanted me to be. They wanted me visible enough to be controlled, but distant enough to be irrelevant. I reached into my small clutch and pulled out my phone. The screen glowed in the dim light. I opened a secure messaging app, one that Julian did not know existed. I scrolled past the market reports and the bank notifications until I found the contact simply labeled M. Marcus. Marcus was the head of the event planning firm Prestige Events. He was the best in Chicago. Julian had bragged for months about securing Prestige for the gala, claiming he had pulled strings to get them. He didn't know that Prestige Events was a subsidiary of Sterling Ventures. He didn't know that Marcus reported directly to me. I typed a single message. "I am currently being held at the entrance by a receptionist named Tiffany. Apparently I am not on the list. Julian has used his +1 for his secretary. Do not come out yourself. I do not want a scene yet. Just clear the flag on the system and mark me as a board observer, and Marcus ensure the microphone on the main podium is connected to the overriding frequency I gave you yesterday." I hit send. I watched Tiffany across the hall. She was laughing at something a guest said, flipping her hair. Suddenly the iPad in front of her beeped loudly. A red light flashed, then turned green. She frowned, tapping the screen confusedly. The system had just overridden her authority. Her confusion deepened as a message popped up on her screen. I saw her eyes widen. She looked around nervously, then her eyes landed back on me standing in the corner. She didn't know what had happened. She just knew that the system, the infallible digital god she served, had just elevated the woman in the plain black dress to a status higher than anyone else in the room. I put my phone away and waited. I would play their game for a few more hours. I would let them treat me like a nuisance. I would let them relish their small, petty victories, because I knew something they didn't. I wasn't just attending the party. I was the one who was going to end it. A few seconds later, Tiffany waved me over, her attitude completely changed. "There seems to have been a system glitch, ma'am," she stammered, her face pale. "Please go right in." I walked past her without a word. I didn't need to acknowledge her. She was just a pawn. I was coming for the king. I walked past the velvet ropes and into the cavernous ballroom where the air was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and ambition. The room was a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns, a visual cacophony of wealth being displayed rather than possessed. I spotted my husband's family immediately. It was hard to miss them. My mother-in-law Eleanor was holding court near a massive ice sculpture of the Bennett Tech logo, her laughter piercing through the low hum of conversation like a shattering glass. She was wearing a gown that could only be described as aggressive. It was a bright neon fuchsia that clashed violently with the elegant cream and gold decor of the Ritz-Carlton. Heavy diamond necklaces were stacked around her neck, choking her in brilliance. To Eleanor, subtlety was a sin, and silence was a weakness. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and approached them. "Hello, Eleanor," I said, keeping my voice polite and neutral. She stopped laughing mid-sentence and turned slowly to look at me. Her eyes, heavily lined with black makeup, swept over me with a familiar look of disappointment. It was the same look she had given me on my wedding day when I refused to wear the gaudy tiara she had bought for me. "Oh," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "You made it. And you are wearing that." She gestured vaguely at my dress with a hand weighed down by 3 large rings. My dress was a masterpiece of tailoring, a bespoke creation from a small atelier in Florence that strictly served generational wealth. It was structured yet fluid, made of a silk wool blend that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. It was the epitome of stealth wealth. But to Eleanor, if it did not sparkle, it did not matter. "It is a bit somber, isn't it?" she continued, sipping her drink and looking around for an audience. "It is a celebration, Victoria, not a funeral. Look at Jessica over there." She pointed a manicured finger across the room. Jessica was laughing loudly at a joke Julian had just made, her hand resting on his chest. Her red sequined dress caught every beam of light in the room, making her look like a disco ball. "Now that is how you dress for a gala," Eleanor said, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "She looks vibrant. She looks like she belongs in this world. You just look so plain. It is practically invisible." "I worry that Julian gets bored looking at so much beige and black at home. A man of his stature needs excitement, Victoria." I bit the inside of my cheek. The irony was suffocating. The necklace Eleanor was wearing was a fake. I knew it because I knew the jeweler she claimed to have bought it from, and I knew he would never set a diamond in that setting. My dress cost more than her entire wardrobe, but I said nothing. I simply nodded, playing the part of the chastised daughter-in-law. "I prefer simplicity," I said quietly. "Simplicity is just a nice word for boring," Eleanor snapped. Just as I was about to turn away to hide the flash of anger in my eyes, a deep, warm voice came from behind me. "Actually, Eleanor, I think you might be missing the point entirely." I turned to see Darius walking toward us. Darius was my sister-in-law's husband, a brilliant corporate attorney who had graduated top of his class from Harvard Law. He was the only person in Julian's family who didn't treat conversations like combat. He was tall, wearing a midnight blue tuxedo that fit him perfectly, and his eyes were sharp and intelligent. Darius smiled at me, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. He stepped past Eleanor and stood next to me, looking at my dress with the appreciation of a man who knew quality. "This isn't just black, Victoria," he said, leaning in slightly to inspect the fabric. "The weave is incredible. Is this a custom piece?" The structure of the shoulder line reminds me of the work coming out of the Rossi Atelier in Milan. My mother used to order her suits from there. It is understated, but it screams power. I felt a rush of gratitude. Darius saw me. In a room full of people blinded by glitter, he saw the gold. "It is," I said, allowing a small, real smile to break through my mask. It took 3 fittings to get the drape right. "You have a good eye, Darius," he chuckled, ignoring Eleanor's sour expression. "It is elegant. It makes everyone else in the sequined gowns look like they are trying too hard. You look like the only person here who doesn't need to prove anything." Eleanor huffed, swirling her drink aggressively. "Well, I suppose if you like that sort of thing. I just think a wife should try harder to shine for her husband." Darius opened his mouth to defend me again, ready to deliver one of his polite but devastating verbal takedowns, but he was cut off. "Victoria." The voice barked out like a command to a dog. Julian appeared from the crowd, his face flushed with adrenaline and alcohol. He didn't look at Darius. He didn't look at his mother. His eyes landed on me, and they were full of irritation. "I have been looking for you," he said, stepping into our small circle. He didn't kiss me hello. He didn't compliment me. He looked at me as if I were a piece of furniture that had been placed in the wrong corner. "Hello, Julian," I said. Darius was just admiring the— "I don't care," Julian interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "Listen, I need you to make yourself useful. The waiters are too slow, and I have the investors from Silicon Valley over in the VIP booth. They are asking for the vintage Dom Perignon, and the bar is backed up." He pointed a finger at the far end of the room. "Go to the main bar, find the manager, and tell him I need 3 bottles brought to table 4 immediately. And bring a tray of water, too. Jessica is parched. She has been talking to clients all night while you have been standing here chatting." The disrespect was so blatant that even Eleanor looked a little surprised, though she quickly recovered and smirked. Darius stiffened beside me. "Julian," he said, his voice low and warning, "you can flag down a server. You don't send your wife to fetch drinks like a waitress." Julian turned to Darius, his eyes narrowing. "Stay out of it, Darius. This is business. I need things to run smoothly, and frankly, Victoria is the only one not doing anything important right now." He turned back to me, stepping closer, invading my personal space. His breath smelled of expensive scotch and entitlement. Please don't just stand there looking vacant," he hissed, lowering his voice so only we could hear, though the venom was loud enough. "Go get the champagne. Do not make me wait. And for God's sake, smile when you bring it over. Don't make me lose face because of your uselessness. I need everyone to think we are a happy, functional team, even if you contribute nothing to this operation." My heart hammered against my ribs, a cold, heavy weight. Useless. That was his favorite word for me. He thought I was useless because I didn't work in his office, didn't flatter his ego, and didn't wear sequins. He had no idea that the useless woman standing in front of him had reviewed the quarterly earnings report of this company before he had even woken up this morning. He had no idea that the vintage Dom Perignon he was demanding was only stocked in this hotel because I had a personal preference for it, and the hotel manager knew to keep it on hand for me. I looked at Darius, who looked ready to grab Julian by the lapels. I gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of my head. Not yet. The time would come, but not yet. I looked back at Julian. His face was expectant, arrogant, waiting for my submission. "Of course, Julian," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I would hate for you to be thirsty." "Good," Julian said, turning his back on me instantly to smile at a passing donor. "Hurry up." I turned and began to walk toward the bar. The humiliation burned in my chest hot and sharp, but I fed it into the furnace of my resolve. He wanted me to be a servant, fine. I would serve him. I would serve him the coldest glass of revenge he had ever tasted. As I walked away, I could hear Eleanor whispering to Darius, "See, she knows her place. She is just happy to be included." I walked with my head high, the silk of my dress flowing around me like armor. I wasn't going to get the manager to beg for champagne. I was going to the bar to prepare the stage for his destruction. Every step I took away from them was a step closer to the moment I would take everything back. They thought I was walking away in shame. In reality, I was just clearing the blast zone. I navigated through the thick crowd toward the main bar, which was a monolith of backlit onyx and brass, towering over the guests like an altar to excess. The air here was louder, filled with the aggressive laughter of men who measured their worth in stock options, and the shrill giggles of women who measured theirs in diamond carats. I kept my head down, moving with the efficiency of someone who had been invisible for a very long time. When I reached the counter, the bartender looked at me with exhausted eyes. He was a young man, probably a student working extra hours to pay tuition. I gave him a small, sympathetic smile. "3 bottles of the 2008 Dom Perignon for table 4, please," I said, keeping my voice polite but firm, "and a glass of sparkling water for myself." He nodded, rubbing his temples. "That will be $1,800, ma'am. Do you want to start a tab or close it out?" "Close it out, please," I said. I reached into my clutch. It was a small, unassuming black leather pouch, but inside it held the keys to a kingdom Julian could only dream of. I bypassed the sleek, heavy titanium card tucked in the hidden inner pocket and instead pulled out the joint credit card Julian had given me 3 years ago. It was a standard platinum card, the kind he flashed around to show he had made it to the middle class. To me, it was just a leash. I placed the card on the marble counter. The bartender swiped it. We waited. The machine let out a sharp, jarring beep. A red light flashed on the terminal. The bartender frowned and swiped it again. This time he did it slower, as if the speed of the swipe could change the balance of the bank account. Beep. "I am sorry, ma'am," the bartender said, his voice dropping to a whisper to spare me the embarrassment. "It says declined. Do you have another form of payment?" I felt a vibration in my hand. I lifted my phone and looked at the screen. A notification from the bank app lit up the display. Alert. Card ending in 4098 has been suspended by the primary account holder. Reason: spending limit exceeded. I stared at the screen. Spending limit exceeded. I hadn't used this card in 2 weeks. The last thing I had bought was a set of hardcover encyclopedias on market history and a few vintage novels for my study. The total had been less than $300. Suddenly, I felt a hand clamp down on my shoulder. It wasn't a gentle touch. It was possessive, heavy, and warning. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The scent of sandalwood and expensive scotch washed over me. Julian leaned in close, his lips brushing against my ear. To anyone watching, it looked like a husband whispering a romantic nothing to his wife. But his voice was cold, razor sharp, and laced with a cruel satisfaction. "I locked it, Victoria." I turned my head slightly, meeting his eyes. He was smiling that charming public smile, but his eyes were dead. Why, I asked simply. "Because you have been out of control lately," he whispered, tightening his grip on my shoulder. I saw the bill for those books last week, $300 on old dusty paper. Do you think money grows on trees? You are buying useless trash while I am out here trying to build an empire. I looked at him. He was serious. He truly believed that $300 on books was reckless spending, while he was currently dropping $20,000 on a party to impress people who didn't care about him. I needed those books for my research, I said calmly. Research. He scoffed, a low, derisive sound in his throat. You are a housewife, Victoria. You don't do research. You do hobbies, and your hobbies are becoming expensive, so I put a stop to it. I set your limit to 0. Tonight, you don't spend a dime. If you want a drink, ask me nicely and maybe I will buy you one. But you are not charging anything to my account. He patted my shoulder condescendingly, like one would pat a slow child. Now be a good girl and tell the bartender to put the champagne on the corporate tab. I authorized Jessica to sign for it. She knows how to manage company resources, unlike you. He pulled away, winking at the bartender before turning on his heel and sauntering back toward the VIP section where Jessica was waiting. I watched him go. I watched the way he adjusted his jacket, feeling like the king of the world because he had just cut off his wife's allowance. I turned back to the bartender, who was looking at me with profound pity. He had heard enough to understand the dynamic. He thought I was the poor dependent wife cut off by the powerful husband. He thought I was trapped. I will just put this on the corporate account as instructed, I said, my voice steady. As he went to fetch the bottles, I looked down at my phone again at the notification. Julian thought he had stripped me of my power. He thought he had humiliated me. Inside my chest, a bubble of laughter threatened to rise up. It was hilarious, really. He was so proud of locking a card that had a $5,000 limit. He had no idea what was sitting just millimeters away from that declined piece of plastic. I slid my finger into the inner pocket of my clutch and touched the cold, smooth surface of the other card, the black card. It wasn't just a platinum card. It was the American Express Centurion card, the invite-only tier that required spending millions of dollars a year just to qualify. It was made of anodized titanium. It was heavy, and it was linked to the Sterling Trust, the massive family fund that I controlled. Julian didn't know this card existed. He didn't know that the house we lived in was bought by a shell company paid for by this card. He didn't know that the very suit he was wearing had been paid for by a dividend check from my investments. He was out there acting like a gatekeeper locking a garden gate while I held the deed to the entire estate. He called my books useless. Those books contained the market analysis that helped me triple the value of his competitor's stock last month. He thought he was teaching me a lesson in financial responsibility. In reality, he was just giving me permission to stop pretending. I had spent 5 years playing the role of the frugal wife, using the allowance he gave me to soothe his fragile ego. I let him believe he was the provider. I let him believe his paycheck supported us. But tonight, he had broken the contract. He had used money as a weapon to humiliate me publicly. Fine Julian, I thought, my thumb tracing the raised letters of my name on the titanium card. You want to play with finances. You want to talk about spending limits. I looked at the bartender who was returning with the champagne. Actually, I said, stopping him. Cancel the water. He looked confused. You don't want anything for yourself, ma'am? I smiled. It was the smile of someone who had just decided to stop counting pennies and start buying islands. No, I said. I think I will save my thirst. I have a feeling I'm going to be celebrating something much bigger than a gala very soon. And when I do, I won't be drinking the cheap stuff. I took the tray of champagne. I would deliver his drinks. I would play the servant one last time, because the tighter he pulled the leash, the closer he dragged me to the moment where I would snap it around his neck. He had locked a credit card. I was about to lock down his entire life. I walked back into the crowd, the hidden black card burning a hole in my pocket. The financial humiliation he intended for me had backfired. It didn't make me feel small. It reminded me exactly how big I really was. And it reminded me that it was time to stop hiding. I balanced the heavy silver tray on my left hand, navigating back through the crush of people. The 3 bottles of Dom Perignon rattled softly against each other, a sound that sounded like money being burned. My wrist ached under the weight. I was the majority shareholder of this company, yet here I was performing the duties of a catering assistant because my husband wanted to prove he had control over me. I walked slowly, keeping my eyes on the VIP booth in the corner. From 20 feet away, I could see them. Julian was sitting on the plush velvet banquette, his legs spread wide in a posture of arrogance. Jessica was perched on the arm of the sofa right next to him, not in a chair of her own. She was leaning over, whispering something into his ear, and laughing that high, tinkling laugh that sounded like breaking glass. She held a large glass of red wine in her hand, swirling it dangerously close to Julian's shoulder. To anyone watching, they looked like the power couple. I looked like the hired help coming to refill their glasses. I approached the table. The conversation died down as I arrived. The three investors from Silicon Valley looked up at me. They were older men with sharp eyes, and they looked confused. They saw a woman in an elegant black gown carrying a heavy tray while the host sat comfortably. They didn't know who I was, but their instincts told them something was wrong with this picture. "Here are the drinks, Julian," I said, keeping my voice devoid of emotion. Julian didn't look at me. He waved his hand toward the center of the table. "Just put them down, Victoria," he said distractedly, "and pour a glass for Jessica first. She has been telling a fascinating story about the new interface design." I set the tray down on the low marble table. My hand trembled slightly from the strain, but I hid it. I reached for one of the bottles. Jessica stopped talking. She turned her head slowly to look at me. Her eyes were glazed with alcohol and malice. She didn't move to make space for me. In fact, she shifted her legs, blocking my path to the table, making me lean awkwardly over her to reach the glasses. "Oh, hi, Victoria," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I didn't see you come back. You are so quiet, like a ghost." I ignored her. I gripped the cold neck of the champagne bottle, ready to pop the cork, but Jessica wasn't done. She stood up suddenly, pretending to lose her balance. It was a clumsy theatrical movement. She lurched forward, her right hand swinging out in a wide arc. The glass of red wine in her hand didn't just fall, it was launched. I saw it happen in slow motion. The dark crimson liquid flew out of the wide rim of the glass. It wasn't an accident. I saw her wrist flick. I saw the calculated narrowing of her eyes a split second before the impact. The wine hit me square in the chest. It splashed across the bodice of my bespoke black silk dress, running down the front like a wound. The cold liquid soaked instantly into the delicate fabric, ruining thousands of dollars of Italian craftsmanship in a heartbeat. The glass followed, hitting the floor at my feet and shattering into 1,000 glittering shards. The sound of the crash silenced the entire VIP section. I stood frozen. The wine was cold against my skin. The smell of fermented grapes filled my nose, overpowering the scent of the lilies. I looked down at my dress. The silk was heavy and sticky, clinging to my body. Jessica gasped. It was a loud, exaggerated sound. She brought her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with mock horror. "Oh my God," she cried out. "Oh, Victoria, I am so clumsy. I am so sorry. She didn't move to help me. She didn't reach for a napkin." She stood there staring at the stain on my chest, and then a small smirk tugged at the corner of her lips. "But you know what?" She continued, her voice pitching up so everyone could hear. "It is actually a good thing you wore that black dress. It is so dark and old. You can hardly see the stain. If you had worn something bright and fashionable like mine, it would have been a disaster. But on that old thing, it really doesn't matter, does it? It hides the dirt well." The insult hit harder than the wine. She wasn't just calling my dress old, she was calling me dirt. She was saying that I was designed to absorb her mess, that I was invisible enough that even a stain wouldn't register on my existence. I looked up at her. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab the champagne bottle and smash it on the table. But I didn't. I stood perfectly still, my hands at my sides, letting the wine drip onto the carpet. Suddenly, there was a flurry of movement. Julian jumped up from the sofa. For a split second, a foolish, hopeful part of me thought he was coming to help me. I thought he would take his jacket off and wrap it around me. I thought he would yell at Jessica for being careless. I thought he would protect his wife. I was wrong. Julian rushed past me, his shoulder brushing against mine hard enough to make me stumble in my heels. He went straight to Jessica. He grabbed her hands, inspecting them frantically. "Jessica, are you okay?" he asked, his voice full of concern. "Did the glass cut you? Did any of it get on your dress?" "I am fine, Julian," she whimpered, playing the victim perfectly. I slipped. I feel so terrible." Julian let out a breath of relief. "Thank God. That dress is a rental, isn't it? We can't have you ruining it." Then he turned to me. The concern vanished from his face, instantly replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated anger. He looked at the shattered glass on the floor, then at the wine stain on my chest. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask if I was cold. "Victoria, what is wrong with you?" He snapped loud enough for the investors to hear. I stared at him, stunned. "Me? Yes, you," he hissed, stepping closer, his face contorted with irritation. "You were standing right in her way. Why do you always have to hover like that? You crowded her. You made her spill." "I didn't move, Julian," I said, my voice barely a whisper. She threw it. "Don't be ridiculous," he scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Why would she throw wine on you?" "You are being paranoid again, just like with the credit card. You are clumsy, and you are awkward, and now you have made a scene." He gestured wildly at the mess on the floor. "Look at this. Broken glass everywhere, sticky wine on the carpet. Do you have any idea how much this hotel charges for cleaning fees? And now look at you. You look like a mess. You are dripping wet. It is embarrassing, Victoria." He looked around at the investors who were watching the scene with uncomfortable expressions. Julian gave them a tight, apologetic smile. "I apologize, gentlemen. My wife is a little uncoordinated tonight. She doesn't get out much. Please excuse the disruption." He turned back to me, his eyes cold and hard as stones. "Go to the bathroom and clean yourself up," he ordered. "Do not come back out until you look presentable. And if that stain doesn't come out, well, maybe you should just go wait in the car. I can't have you standing next to me smelling like a winery while I'm trying to close a deal." Jessica stood behind him, peering over his shoulder. She caught my eye. She didn't look sorry. She winked. A slow, deliberate wink. She had won. She had marked her territory with red wine, and my husband had helped her do it. I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't a break. It was a click, like the safety catch on a weapon being disengaged. For years I had made excuses for him. I told myself he was stressed. I told myself he was ambitious. I told myself he loved me in his own flawed way. But looking at him now fussing over his mistress's perfectly manicured hands while his wife stood shivering and soaked in wine, I finally saw the truth. He didn't just take me for granted. He despised me. He despised my silence. He despised my support. He despised the very presence of me because I was the only thing standing between him and the fantasy life he wanted to live with Jessica. I looked down at the puddle of wine near my feet. It looked like blood, the death of my marriage. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself against his accusations of being clumsy. There was no point in arguing with a man who had already decided on the verdict before the crime was even committed. "Fine, Julian," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. It was too calm. It lacked the tremor of sadness that usually accompanied our fights. It was the voice of a judge delivering a sentence. "I will go clean up." I turned around. I could feel the eyes of the entire room on my back. I could feel the sticky coldness of the wine seeping through to my skin. But I didn't walk with my head down. I walked slowly, deliberately toward the restroom. As I walked away, I heard Julian's voice behind me, loud and jovial, trying to recover the mood. Anyway, as I was saying about the Q3 projections, Jessica here has some brilliant ideas. He had dismissed me. He had erased me. He thought the problem was solved because the stain was walking away. He didn't know that I wasn't going to the bathroom to cry. I wasn't going to try to wash the wine out of the silk. The dress was ruined, and I didn't care. I was done trying to save things. I was done trying to be clean. I was going to the bathroom to check my makeup, to make sure my eyeliner was sharp enough to cut. Because when I came back out, I wasn't going to be the clumsy wife anymore. I was going to be the executioner. I pushed open the heavy door to the ladies' room. It was empty, thank God. I walked to the sink and looked at myself in the mirror. The black dress was soaked, a dark, ugly patch spreading across my chest. My face was pale, but my eyes were burning with a fire that had been banked for too long. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a tissue, dabbing gently at the wine on my skin. I didn't touch the dress. I wanted the stain to be there. I wanted it to be visible. It was my war paint now. The door opened behind me. I watched in the mirror as Jessica walked in. She was checking her phone, smiling to herself. When she looked up and saw me, her smile widened into a grin of pure predator delight. She thought I was in there to hide. She thought she had cornered the mouse. She didn't know the mouse was actually a trap. She walked over to the sink next to me, turning on the tap. She looked at my reflection, her eyes dancing with mockery. "Oops," she said, softy. "I guess you really should have stayed home tonight, Victoria. This world, it is just a bit too messy for you, isn't it?" I turned slowly to face her. The calmness in my chest expanded, filling every corner of my being. It was time. "No, Jessica," I said, my voice steady and low. "I think I am exactly where I need to be." I took a step closer to her. The air in the bathroom seemed to drop 10 degrees. The game was over. It was time to ask the question. I stood perfectly still in the sterile brightness of the restroom, listening to the hum of the ventilation system. The wine stain on my chest was cold and sticky, a dark map of humiliation that Jessica had drawn with such precision. Most women would be frantically scrubbing at the silk, trying to erase the evidence of their defeat. Most women would be crying in a stall, calling their mother or their best friend to sob about how mean the mistress was. But I was not most women. I was Victoria Sterling, and I was done scrubbing. I looked at Jessica in the mirror. She was leaning against the marble counter, reapplying her lipstick. The shade was a violent crimson, matching the wine she had just thrown on me. She met my gaze in the glass and smirked. It was the smirk of a woman who believed she held all the cards. She thought she had the man, the power, and the beauty, while I was just the discarded wife, the obstacle to be removed. "You are staring," she said, snapping her compact shut with a loud click. "It is rude to stare, Victoria, but I guess you don't have much else to do tonight since Julian made it clear he doesn't want you around." I turned slowly to face her. My heels clicked softly on the tiled floor. I didn't reach for a paper towel. I didn't try to cover the stain with my arms. I let it be visible. I wore it like a declaration of war. "I am not staring, Jessica." I said, my voice low and even. "I am observing. There is a difference." She laughed, a harsh sound that bounced off the tiled walls. "Observing what? How much better I look than you. How much happier he is with me. You really are pathetic. You cling to him like a bad habit. Don't you have any pride?" She pushed off the counter and took a step toward me. She was younger than me and taller in her heels, but in that moment she felt incredibly small. She invaded my personal space, the scent of her cloying perfume mixing with the smell of the wine on my dress. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on the stain with malicious delight. "You know," she said, leaning in close, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "he talks about you sometimes. Not often, just when he is bored. He tells me how dull it is at home, how you just sit there reading your books and tending your garden while he is out conquering the world. He says being with you is like being in a library. Quiet, dusty, boring." She paused, waiting for me to flinch. When I didn't, she delivered her final blow, the line she had probably rehearsed in her head 1,000 times. "No wonder he works late, so often avoiding going home." The words hung in the air between us. It was a direct hit. It was meant to shatter my heart, to confirm my deepest insecurities, to send me running out of the bathroom in tears. She smiled triumphantly, waiting for the breakdown. But the breakdown didn't come. Instead, I smiled. It was a slow, sweet smile, the kind of smile a mother gives a child who has just told a lie that everyone knows is a lie. It was a smile of absolute terrifying pity. Jessica's smile faltered. She blinked, confused by my reaction. She took a half step back, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. The prey wasn't running. The prey was smiling. "You think he works late?" I asked softly. My voice was gentle, almost kind. I took a step forward, closing the gap she had created. She took another step back, her back hitting the cold marble of the sink counter. She was trapped. I leaned in. I moved into her personal space closer than she had been to me. I could see the heavy foundation on her skin, the tiny beads of sweat forming at her hairline. "He doesn't work late, Jessica," I whispered. "He just tells you that because it makes you feel important. It makes you feel like you are part of his empire." "But let me ask you something about that empire." I brought my lips close to her ear, my voice dropping to a level that was barely audible, but carried the weight of a falling guillotine. "The $50,000 Julian wired to your consulting account last month." I felt her body stiffen instantly. Her breath hitched. I continued my tone conversational, yet lethal. "I saw the transfer. Use of funds from the shell company labeled JB Holdings. He categorized it as external consultation fees. But we both know you don't do any consulting, do we, Jessica? Unless consulting involves hotel rooms and spilled wine." I pulled back slightly, just enough to look her in the eyes. Her pupils were dilated with panic. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked like a fish pulled out of water. "Has that $50,000 been declared to the IRS yet, Jessica?" I asked, my voice incredibly polite. "Because tax fraud is a federal crime. And since I am the one who actually audits the accounts of JB Holdings, I would hate to see you go to prison for a man who won't even publicly acknowledge you as his girlfriend." She started to shake. Her hands gripped the edge of the sink, her knuckles turning white. How do you—" she stammered. "I wasn't done. I had one more card to play. The ace." And speaking of public acknowledgments, I continued, tilting my head to the side. "What about Brad?" The color drained from her face completely. It was as if I had physically slapped her. "Brad. The fiancé waiting for you back in Naperville, the one you told you were working overtime to save money for your wedding?" I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. I didn't unlock it. I just held it in my hand, a black mirror reflecting her terror. I wonder what Brad would think about the consulting fees. I wonder if he would be interested in seeing the bank statements. Or maybe he would prefer the security footage from the hotel hallway on the 14th floor from last Tuesday. I have that too. Jessica looked at the phone, then at me. Her arrogance was gone. Her confidence had cracked like glass. She looked young and terrified and foolish. "Please," she whispered. Her voice was trembling. "Please don't." I smiled again, that same sweet, cold smile. "I haven't decided yet," I said. "It depends on how the rest of this night goes. If I see you standing next to my husband again, if I hear one more word of disrespect, if you even look in my direction for the rest of this evening, I will hit send. And by tomorrow morning, the IRS and Brad will both have a very interesting package in their inbox." I stepped back, giving her space to breathe. She slumped against the sink, gasping for air, as if she had been underwater. "Fix your lipstick, Jessica," I said, turning toward the door. "You look like a mess." I walked out of the restroom without looking back. The silence behind me was heavy with her fear. I walked back into the hallway, the wine stain on my dress drying into a stiff, dark patch. I didn't care about the dress anymore. I had just cleaned up something much dirtier. I made my way back toward the ballroom. The music was swelling, the party was in full swing. Julian was probably wondering where I was, probably crafting a joke about his clumsy wife to entertain his guests. He had no idea that his shield, his distraction, his mistress had just been neutralized. I felt lighter. The anger was still there, but it was no longer a hot, chaotic fire. It was a cold, forged blade. I had taken down the pawn. Now it was time for the king. I checked my watch. The keynote speech was in 10 minutes. 10 minutes until Julian took the stage. 10 minutes until I took everything else. I walked back into the ballroom and positioned myself near a large potted palm tree in the shadows of the mezzanine. It was the perfect vantage point. From here I could see the entire floor, the glittering tables, the bustling waiters, and most importantly, the entrance to the ladies' restroom. I took a fresh glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and waited. I did not have to wait long. The door to the restroom pushed open slowly. Jessica emerged. 5 minutes ago, she had walked into that room with the swagger of a queen bee. She had entered with her head high, her hips swaying, ready to taunt the defeated wife. Now she walked out like a fugitive. Her posture had collapsed. The vibrant arrogance that usually radiated from her was gone, replaced by a frantic, nervous energy. She stopped just outside the door, her eyes darting around the room, scanning the crowd. She wasn't looking for Julian. She was looking for me. When her eyes finally swept over the mezzanine and failed to spot me in the shadows, her shoulders did not relax. Instead, she tensed up even more. She looked terrifyingly exposed. The red sequined dress, which she had worn like a weapon, now looked cheap and gaudy under the harsh chandeliers. She pulled at the hem, trying to cover herself, trying to shrink. She needed a drink. I could see the thirst for courage in her eyes. She made a beeline for the nearest waiter, snatching a flute of champagne from his tray with a hand that was visibly shaking. She brought the glass to her lips, but she didn't drink. Her hand was trembling so violently that the golden liquid sloshed over the rim, spilling onto her fingers. She flinched, staring at the wetness on her hand. It must have reminded her of the wine she threw on me. It must have reminded her that actions have consequences. Suddenly, a loud, booming laugh echoed from the center of the room. It was Julian. He was holding court with the investors, enjoying the sound of his own voice. He spotted Jessica and waved her over his face, lighting up with possessive pride. He had no idea that his asset had just become a liability. Jessica froze. For the first time in her life, she did not run to him. She hesitated. She looked at Julian. Then she looked at her phone, which she was clutching like a lifeline. I knew exactly what she was thinking. She was thinking about the IRS audit. She was thinking about Brad in Naperville. She was thinking about the $50,000 she had thought was free money, which was now a chain around her neck. Julian frowned when she didn't move. He excused himself from the group and strode toward her, his expression shifting from jovial to annoyed. He reached her and placed a heavy hand on the small of her back, pulling her toward him. "Where have you been?" he asked, loud enough for me to hear over the low jazz music. "The investors are asking about the interface rollout. I need you to confirm the timeline. Come on." He tried to guide her back to the VIP table, but Jessica planted her feet. She pulled away from his touch, as if his hand were red-hot iron. "I can't," she whispered. Her voice was thin and brittle. Julian blinked, confused. "What do you mean you can't? Are you sick? You look pale. Did you drink too much?" "No, I need a minute," Jessica stammered. She took a step back, putting distance between them. She kept glancing around the room, her eyes wide and fearful, terrified that I might pop out from behind a curtain with a federal agent or a phone recording. Julian let out an exasperated sigh. He ran a hand through his hair. "Jessica, this is not the time for drama. You were fine 5 minutes ago. You were the life of the party. What happened in the bathroom? Did Victoria say something to you?" At the mention of my name, Jessica dropped her glass. It slipped right through her damp, trembling fingers. The crystal flute hit the marble floor with a sharp, shattering crash that cut through the conversation nearby. Champagne splashed onto Julian's polished dress shoes. "Damn it, Jessica!" Julian hissed, jumping back. "Look what you did! What is wrong with you tonight? First Victoria makes a mess, now you. Is incompetence contagious? I am sorry. Jessica gasped. She looked down at the broken glass and looked like she was about to vomit. "I have to go. I can't be here." She didn't wait for his permission. She turned and practically ran, not toward the exit, but toward the dark corners of the room near the kitchen service doors. She wanted to be invisible. She wanted to disappear into the walls. She found a spot behind a large decorative pillar and huddled there, typing furiously on her phone. I watched with a calm satisfaction. She was probably texting Brad, checking if he was still there, if he still loved her, if he had received any strange emails. She was checking her bank account, staring at that $50,000 deposit that now looked like evidence. Julian stood alone in the middle of the hallway, staring at the spot where she had vanished. He looked completely baffled. He looked down at his wet shoes, then back at the empty space. For the first time all night, the mask of the confident CEO slipped. He looked like a man who was losing control of his toys. He didn't understand. In his world, women were static objects. The wife was the boring appliance you kept in the kitchen. The mistress was the shiny toy you took to parties. They were supposed to stay in their lanes. He couldn't comprehend why his shiny toy was suddenly broken and afraid of him. He couldn't comprehend that the boring appliance had just rewired the entire electrical system of his life. He looked around the room, searching for someone to blame. He scanned the crowd, his eyes narrowing. He was looking for me now. He wanted to yell at someone, and since Jessica was hiding, I was the designated target. I stepped out from behind the palm tree. I didn't hide. I let him see me. I stood on the mezzanine looking down at him. My face was perfectly impassive. The wine stain on my dress was still there, but I stood with the posture of a statue. I caught his eye. Julian froze. He saw me looking at him. Usually when our eyes met, I would look away or smile nervously, seeking his approval. Tonight I held his gaze. I looked at him with the cold, detached interest of a scientist observing a specimen in a jar. He mouthed something to me. It looked like, "What did you do?" I didn't answer. I just raised my glass of water in a silent toast and took a slow, deliberate sip. He looked back at the corner where Jessica was cowering, then back at me. The gears in his head were grinding, trying to connect the dots, but he was too arrogant to see the picture. He assumed I had insulted her. He assumed I had cried and begged and made Jessica feel guilty. He couldn't imagine a world where I held power over her. He shook his head, dismissing the thought. He straightened his tie, fixed his jacket, and turned back to the investors. He decided to ignore the problem. That was Julian's strategy for everything. Ignore the debt, ignore the unhappy wife, ignore the cracks in the foundation. He walked back to the VIP table, putting on his best fake smile. "Sorry, gentlemen," he announced loudly. "Lady troubles, you know how it is. Too much excitement for them." The men laughed a low brotherhood of dismissal. But I saw his hand. As he reached for his drink, his hand was shaking just a little. A tiny tremor. He sensed something was wrong. The air in the room had changed. The energy had shifted. He was no longer the predator. I looked over at Jessica behind the pillar. She was watching him too. But she wasn't looking at him with adoration anymore. She was looking at him with fear. She realized that being near him was dangerous. She realized that he wasn't her ticket to the high life. He was her accomplice in a crime she was about to be punished for. The triangle was broken. The alliance between them was severed. I had isolated the king. I checked my watch. 5 minutes until the speech. 5 minutes until I went downstairs and finished what I started. I set my glass down on a passing tray. The water tasted sweet. The psychological collapse was complete. Now it was time for the professional execution. I smoothed the skirt of my stained dress and began to make my way toward the stage. The lights in the grand ballroom dimmed slowly until the room was plunged into a heavy, expectant darkness. A single beam of stark white light cut through the gloom, hitting the center of the stage. The hum of the microphone feedback whined for a split second before silence fell over the 500 guests. Then the music started. It was a fast-tempo electronic track, the kind of music meant to inspire thoughts of innovation and the future. Julian walked onto the stage. He moved with the practiced swagger of a man who believed he was God's gift to the tech industry. He adjusted his cufflinks, flashed a blinding smile at the front row, and raised his hands to quell the applause. The applause was loud, it was enthusiastic, and every single person clapping had no idea that they were cheering for a fraud. I watched him from my table in the back. I had moved away from the shadows and taken my assigned seat at table number 42, a table so far from the stage it was practically in the kitchen. It was another calculated insult. The CEO's wife sitting next to the interns and the third-party vendors. But I didn't mind. The distance gave me perspective. It allowed me to see the entire performance for what it was, a tragedy disguised as a victory lap. Julian gripped the podium with both hands, leaning forward as if he were about to share the secrets of the universe. "Thank you," he boomed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "Thank you all for being here tonight. 5 years ago, Bennett Tech was just an idea sketched on a napkin in a coffee shop. People told me I was crazy. People told me that the market was saturated. They said I didn't have the capital or the connections to disrupt the industry." He paused for dramatic effect, looking out over the crowd with a misty expression. But I didn't listen to the naysayers. I didn't listen to the doubts. I looked inward. I relied on my own grit, my own vision, and my own relentless drive. I built this company brick by brick with my own 2 hands. I took a sip of my water, my own 2 hands. It was laughable. He had forgotten the part where he cried in my lap because the bank denied his first loan application. He had forgotten the part where I liquidated my grandmother's vintage jewelry collection to pay for the initial server costs. He had forgotten that the napkin sketch was actually my drawing, which I had explained to him over breakfast while he complained about his old boss. He was rewriting history in real time, erasing my fingerprints from the foundation of the building he was standing on. But tonight is not just about looking back. Julian continued, his voice rising with passion. It is about looking forward. It is about acknowledging the people who actually get the work done, the people who are in the trenches with me, the people who understand that greatness requires sacrifice. He scanned the room. I saw him looking for her. He was looking for Jessica. I glanced toward the side of the room. Jessica was still hiding near the emergency exit. She looked small and terrified. She was hugging her arms around herself, trying to blend into the velvet curtains. She knew I was watching her. She knew that one wrong move would trigger the nuclear option I had promised her in the bathroom, but Julian didn't know that. He only saw his prize. I want to take a moment to recognize someone special, he said, his voice softening into a tone that was inappropriate for a professional setting. Someone who has been my right hand, my left hand, and my inspiration. Someone who doesn't complain about the late nights because she knows that we are building a legacy. He pointed a finger directly at the dark corner where she was cowering. Jessica, stand up. The spotlight swung wildly, searching for her. It swept across the room, blinding guests, until it landed on her. She flinched, shielding her eyes. She looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck. She shook her head slightly, mouthing the word no, but Julian was relentless. Come on, don't be shy, he urged, laughing into the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for my executive assistant and the true heart of our creative team, Jessica. She has spent more nights in the office with me than she has in her own apartment these past 6 months. That is dedication. That is passion. The crowd applauded politely, but there was a murmur of confusion. The phrase "spent more nights in the office with me" hung in the air. It was too intimate. It was a slip. A Freudian slip broadcast over a state-of-the-art sound system. Jessica didn't wave. She didn't smile. She stared at me across the room, her eyes wide with panic, pleading with me not to send the email. I just looked at her calmly, tapping my finger against the rim of my glass. I let her sweat. Julian seemed disappointed by her lack of enthusiasm, but he quickly pivoted back to himself. You see, he said, turning back to the center, success is about surrounding yourself with people who fuel your fire, people who push you to be better. It is about synergy. He took a deep breath, preparing for the next part of his speech. This was the part I had been waiting for. I knew his script. I knew how his mind worked. He needed to justify what he was about to do to me personally. A lot of you have asked me how I balance it all, he said, adopting a more somber, serious tone. How I manage a billion-dollar valuation and a personal life. And the truth is, sometimes you can't. Sometimes you realize that in order to fly, you have to cut the strings that are holding you to the ground. The room went quiet. He was going off script now. He was speaking from his ego. We are entering a new phase at Bennett Tech, he announced. Phase 2. And Phase 2 requires a different kind of leadership and a different kind of lifestyle. We are shedding the old skin. We are removing the factors that hold back our development. We are trimming the dead weight. Dead weight. He didn't say my name. He didn't have to. He looked directly at table 42. He looked right at me. There was no love in his eyes. There was only contempt. He saw a woman in a plain black dress who he thought was living off his charity. He saw an anchor he wanted to cut loose so he could sail away with his sequined mistress. He was publicly declaring his intention to divorce me without signing the papers. He was telling 500 of the most powerful people in Chicago that I was the thing holding him back from greatness. I felt a gaze burning into me from the VIP section. I turned my head slightly. It was Darius. My brother-in-law was sitting at the head table next to his wife Julian's sister. He wasn't clapping. He wasn't smiling. He was holding his wine glass mid-air frozen. He looked at Julian on stage, then he looked back at me. His dark eyes were filled with a mixture of shock and disgust. Darius was a smart man. He heard the dog whistle. He understood exactly what trimmed the dead weight meant. He knew how much I had sacrificed for Julian. He remembered the early days when I cooked dinner for the whole team because they couldn't afford catering. He remembered who proofread the legal contracts because Julian was too lazy to do it. Darius shook his head slowly. It was a small movement, but it spoke volumes. He set his glass down on the table with a sharp clack. He crossed his arms over his chest, distancing himself from the man on stage. He was the only one in the room who seemed to realize that Julian wasn't making a victory speech. He was reading his own suicide note. Julian continued oblivious to the tension he was creating. So tonight, he shouted, raising his fist in the air, "Let us toast to the future, a future where we are unburdened, a future where we are free to choose our own partners in success, to the new Bennett Tech, and to the new life that awaits us all." The crowd cheered. They cheered for the buzzwords. They cheered for the champagne. They cheered because they were programmed to cheer for the man with the microphone. Julian beamed, basking in the adoration. He looked like a king on his coronation day. He thought he had won. He thought he had successfully humiliated his wife, praised his mistress, and cemented his status as a visionary all in one speech. I watched him take a bow. I watched him wipe the sweat from his forehead. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. I unlocked it. The screen was bright in the dim room. I opened the app that controlled the audiovisual system of the ballroom. A system that my event company had installed. A system that had a backdoor override code that only I possessed. He wanted to talk about the future. He wanted to talk about the truth. He wanted to shed the old skin. I tapped the screen. The microphone on stage didn't cut out. It stayed live. But the input source for the massive LED screen behind him shifted. The logo of Bennett Tech dissolved. Julian was still waving to the crowd, unaware of what was happening behind him. I stood up. I didn't rush. I didn't stumble. I pushed my chair back and it made a scraping sound that was lost in the applause. I smoothed the front of my dress over the wine stain. I walked toward the aisle. Darius saw me stand. He sat up straighter. He watched me with intense curiosity. He didn't try to stop me. In fact, he shifted his chair slightly, giving me a clearer path to the stage stairs. He knew. He knew the calm before the storm when he saw it. I walked past the tables. People turned to look at me. They saw the wife, the dead weight, the woman who had been ignored. They saw the wine stain. Some of them snickered. Some of them looked away in embarrassment. I kept my eyes on Julian. "Enjoy your moment, darling," I thought as I approached the stairs, "because it is the last one you will ever have." I climbed the steps to the stage. The sound of my heels on the wood echoed through the speakers because the microphone was picking up everything. Julian turned. His smile dropped. He looked annoyed. "Victoria," he hissed, covering the mic with his hand. "What are you doing? Get down. You are embarrassing me. Go back to your seat." I didn't stop. I walked right up to the podium. I stood next to him. I was shorter than him, but in that moment, I towered over him. I reached out and took the microphone from his hand. He was too stunned to resist. He just stared at me, his mouth hanging open. I turned to the crowd. The lights were blinding, but I didn't blink. "I think Julian forgot to mention a few people in his thank yous," I said into the mic. My voice was crystal clear, steady and cold as ice. Julian grabbed my arm. "Victoria, stop," he whispered aggressively. "Get off the stage. You are drunk." I pulled my arm away. I didn't look at him. I looked at the screen behind us. "And I think he forgot to show you the real figures for Phase 2, I said. I pressed the button on my phone. The screen behind us flashed white, and then a document appeared. It wasn't a marketing slide. It wasn't a vision board. It was a forensic accounting report. And right at the top in bold red letters it read, "Embezzlement Investigation Subject Julian Bennett." The room gasped. The sound sucked the air out of the ballroom. I turned to Julian. He was staring at the screen, his face turning the color of ash. "You wanted to trim the dead weight, Julian," I said, my voice booming through the hall. I smiled. "I agree. You are fired." The applause was still dying down, a ripple of polite clapping that sounded more like rain on a tin roof than genuine admiration. Julian stood center stage, basking in it, his arms spread wide as if he were trying to physically embrace the adoration he believed he deserved. He was looking up at the balcony, smiling at the imaginary future he had just painted for them, a future built on lies and my money. I pushed my chair back. The legs of the chair scraped against the parquet floor. It was a harsh, dissonant sound that cut through the lingering applause like a knife. I stood up. I didn't rush. I didn't smooth my dress or check my hair. I simply rose from my seat at table 42, the exile table in the back near the kitchen doors. I looked up toward the lighting booth high above the ballroom floor. I couldn't see him, but I knew Marcus was there. My head of security, my event planner, my loyal ally. I didn't wave. I didn't nod. I simply tilted my chin up slightly, a movement so small it would have been invisible to anyone else. But Marcus saw it. In an instant, the warm, ambient lighting of the ballroom was extinguished. The chandeliers went dark. The table lamps flickered off. The room was plunged into a sudden heavy blackness. The applause faltered. A few people gasped. Someone dropped a fork. The silence that followed was thick with confusion. Then a single beam of light cut through the dark. It didn't hit the stage. It didn't hit Julian. It slammed down directly on me. The spotlight was blindingly white hot and intense. It isolated me from the rest of the room, carving me out of the darkness. For a second I was blinded, but I didn't blink. I let the light wash over me. I let it illuminate the plain black dress. I let it highlight the dark, ugly wine stain on my chest. I let it show everyone exactly who I was. I wasn't the invisible wife anymore. I was the only thing in the room that mattered. I began to walk. The path to the stage was long. It was a gauntlet. I had to walk past 20 tables of people who had ignored me all night. I walked past the marketing team who had snickered when I asked about their strategies. I walked past the board members who had looked right through me when I tried to introduce myself. My heels clicked against the floor, a steady rhythmic beat that echoed in the silence. Click, click, click. It was the sound of a clock counting down. I kept my eyes locked on Julian. He was standing on the stage, shielding his eyes against the glare, trying to see what was happening. When he finally realized the spotlight was following me, his expression shifted from confusion to pure, unadulterated annoyance. He looked like a parent whose toddler had just interrupted a dinner party. He didn't see a threat. He saw a nuisance. He saw a mess that needed to be cleaned up. I reached the stairs leading up to the stage. They were wooden polished to a high shine. I took the first step. Julian stepped forward to the edge of the stage. He moved his hand to the control panel on the podium and flipped a switch. The green light on his microphone went dead. He had cut the audio feed to the house speakers. He thought he was being discreet. He thought he could handle this quietly, like he handled everything else in his life, pushing the problem into a corner until it went away. "Victoria," he hissed. His voice was a harsh whisper meant only for me, but in the dead silence of the room it carried to the front rows. "What the hell do you think you are doing? Get down from here immediately. You are drunk. You are making a scene." I didn't answer. I took the second step. "Go back to your seat," he demanded, his face contorting with anger. "Look at you. You are stained. You are a mess. Do not make me call security. I am warning you, Victoria. Do not embarrass me tonight. This is the biggest night of my career." I reached the top of the stairs. I was on the stage now, level with him. I walked past him. I didn't even look at him. I walked straight to the center of the stage, directly into the pool of light where he had been standing moments ago. I stood next to the podium. Julian rushed over. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep. I said, "Get off!" he snarled, leaning in close so the audience couldn't see his rage. "I will deal with you later. I will cancel your cards. I will lock you out of the house. Now turn around and walk away before I really lose my temper." I looked down at his hand on my arm. Then I looked up at his eyes. I smiled. It wasn't the submissive smile I had worn for 5 years. It wasn't the smile of the supportive wife. It was the smile of the executioner. I pulled my arm away from his grip. It was a sharp, violent motion that made him stumble back a step. He reached for the microphone on the podium, intending to make a joke to the crowd to explain away his crazy wife. But I was faster. I reached into my clutch. Julian flinched. For a second, I think he thought I had a weapon. In a way, I did. I pulled out my own microphone. It was a sleek, professional-grade wireless unit that I had brought with me from the car. It was already paired to the sound system on a priority channel that overrode every other input in the room. I had prepared this days ago. I had prepared for this moment while he was busy buying sequins for Jessica. I flicked the switch on the side of the microphone. A sharp, high-pitched squeal of feedback ripped through the air, shaking the speakers. The audience jumped, covering their ears. It was a wake-up call. I brought the microphone to my lips. "I don't think I will be walking away, Julian," I said. My voice boomed through the ballroom. It was louder than his had been. It was crystal clear. It commanded attention. It demanded silence. Julian stared at me, his mouth hanging open. He looked at the microphone in my hand, then back at the dead microphone on the podium. He couldn't understand. How did I have audio? How did I have access? I turned to face the crowd. 500 faces were staring up at me. I saw Darius in the front row. He was leaning forward, his elbows on the table, his eyes intense and focused. He wasn't looking at me with pity anymore. He was looking at me with respect. "I think there has been a mistake in the presentation," I said, my voice steady and cool. "Julian spent a lot of time talking about the future. He talked about vision. He talked about transparency. But he forgot to show you the most important data of all." I held up my other hand. In it, I held a small remote control clicker. Julian saw it. His eyes widened. He lunged for me. "No!" he shouted. "Don't you dare!" He was too late. I pressed the button. Behind us, the massive LED screen that spanned the entire width of the stage flickered. The image of the soaring eagle and the Bennett Tech logo, which had been the backdrop for his speech, dissolved instantly. The screen went black for a heartbeat. Then a new image appeared. It wasn't a graph. It wasn't a pie chart. It wasn't a motivational quote. It was a document. It was a PDF of a forensic audit report. The text was magnified so clearly that even the people in the back row could read it. At the top in bold red letters were the words, "Internal Audit Report, Misappropriation of Funds." Below that was a list. A long, detailed list of transactions. Date October 12th, amount $50,000. Recipient Jessica Miller Consulting. Purpose falsified. Date November 3rd, amount $12,000. Recipient the Ritz-Carlton Presidential Suite. Purpose personal. Date December 1st, amount $200,000. Recipient Cayman Islands Shell account. Authorization forged. Signature of Victoria Sterling. The crowd gasped. It was a collective sound of shock that sucked the air out of the room. People stood up, craning their necks to read the screen. Phones were raised, capturing the evidence. I turned to look at Julian. He was frozen. He was staring at the screen, reading his own crimes projected in high definition. His face had gone completely white. He looked like a ghost. He looked like a man who had just realized that the floor he was standing on was actually a trap door. He turned to me slowly. His arrogance was gone. His anger was gone. There was only fear, pure naked terror. "Victoria," he whispered, his voice trembling. "What? What is this?" I took a step toward him. The spotlight followed me, leaving him in the shadows. "This is the dead weight you wanted to trim, Julian," I said into the microphone, ensuring every single person heard me. "This is the reality of your success. You didn't build this company with your own two hands. You built it with my money, and then you stole from it to fund your lifestyle with your mistress." I pointed the clicker at the screen again. "Next slide." The image changed. Now it showed a bank transfer receipt. It showed the source of the initial funding for Bennett Tech. The name on the account wasn't Julian Bennett. It was the Sterling Trust. And the signatory on the trust was me, Victoria Sterling. I heard a commotion in the VIP section. One of the Silicon Valley investors, the one Julian had been trying so hard to impress, stood up. He looked furious. He looked at Julian with disgust. "You said you were the sole founder," the investor shouted, his voice carrying to the stage. "You said you had no external liabilities." Julian stammered, waving his hands frantically. I can explain. It is a misunderstanding. She is lying. She is just a jealous wife." I laughed. It was a cold, dry sound amplified 1,000 times by the speakers. "A jealous wife," I repeated. "No, Julian, I am not a jealous wife. I am your boss." The room erupted. The whispers turned into shouts. The shock turned into chaos. I turned back to the screen. And as the majority shareholder of this company, I continued, my voice cutting through the noise. "I have a fiduciary duty to protect the assets from criminal mismanagement." I looked at Julian. He was backing away from me. He looked small. He looked pathetic. "So when you said you wanted to remove the factors holding back development, I realized you were right." I took one final step toward him, closing the distance. "I am removing you." Julian hit the back of the podium. He had nowhere left to run. The slide behind him loomed over him like a judgment. The crowd before him looked at him like a criminal, and I stood in front of him holding the microphone like a gavel. He opened his mouth to speak, to beg to lie, but nothing came out. I lowered the microphone slightly, but kept it live. "Get off my stage, Julian," I said softly. He didn't move, so I turned to the side of the stage where the security team was waiting. They weren't Julian's security team. They were mine. "Escort Mr. Bennett off the premises," I ordered, "and call the police. We have a lot of paperwork to file." The room was vibrating with a chaotic energy. The air felt charged with static electricity as 500 pairs of eyes darted between the man trembling on the podium and the woman standing calmly beside him. Julian was gripping the edges of the lectern so hard his knuckles were white. He looked like a captain trying to steer a ship that had already broken in half. "You cannot fire me," he shouted, his voice cracking under the strain. "This is my company. I built this. My name is on the building. You are just a delusional housewife who has had too much to drink. Security, get her off the stage now." He pointed a shaking finger at the guards standing in the wings, but they did not move. They stood with their arms crossed, their faces impassive. They knew who signed their paychecks, and they knew it wasn't the man screaming into the dead microphone. I stepped closer to him, invading his space the way he had invaded mine for years. I held my microphone effortlessly, my voice smooth and controlled, contrasting sharply with his hysteria. "Your name is on the building, Julian, because I allowed it to be there," I said. "It was a branding decision, nothing more. We thought Bennett Tech sounded approachable, friendly. But the name on the lease, the name on the bank accounts, and the name on the incorporation papers is different." I pressed the button on the clicker in my hand. The screen behind us shifted again. The forensic audit disappeared, replaced by a legal document that looked decades old. It was a trust deed stamped with the official seal of the state of Illinois. "Let me introduce you to the real owner of this company," I announced. The words Sterling Ventures appeared on the screen in elegant typography. Julian stared at it. He blinked rapidly, trying to process the words. He knew the name. Everyone in Chicago finance knew the name. Sterling Ventures was a ghost firm, a massive private equity fund that moved silently through the market, acquiring assets and funding startups. It was known for being ruthless, efficient, and incredibly private. Julian had tried to pitch to them 3 times in the past. He had been rejected 3 times, or so he thought. "You see, Julian," I continued addressing him but pitching my voice to the back of the room, "when you came to me 5 years ago with your idea and no money, you thought I went to my parents for a loan. You thought I begged my father for a handout to support your dream." I laughed softly, a cold, humorless sound. "My father died," broke Julian. "You knew that. But what you didn't know was that my grandmother was Matilda Sterling, the steel heiress. And when she passed, she didn't leave her fortune to her son. She left it to me." A gasp rippled through the crowd. I saw Darius in the front row bring a hand to his mouth, his eyes wide. He was putting the pieces together. The bespoke dress, the expensive books, the quiet confidence. It all made sense now. "I founded Sterling Ventures 10 years ago," I said. "I am the chairperson, I am the board, and I am the sole decision maker." I clicked the remote again. A new document appeared. It was the original funding agreement for Bennett Tech. "You didn't get rejected by Sterling Ventures," I explained. "You were acquired by them. I approved the seed funding. I approved the Series A. I approved every single dollar that has ever flowed into this company. I didn't want you to feel threatened by my wealth, so I created a structure where you could feel like the big man. I hired you, Julian." I let the words hang there. "I hired you." Julian looked like he had been punched in the gut. He staggered back a step, his legs hitting the stool behind him. "No," he whispered. "That is not true. I am the CEO. I have stock options. I have equity." I shook my head slowly, looking at him with pity. "You have performance-based phantom stock," I corrected him, "which is voided in the event of termination for cause. And Julian, this is definitely termination for cause." I clicked the remote one more time. This was the kill shot. The screen displayed a magnified image of a withdrawal authorization form. It was dated 3 days ago. The amount was massive. $200,000 transferred to an account in the Cayman Islands. At the bottom of the form was a signature. Victoria Sterling. But the handwriting was wrong. It was shaky. It was too looped. It was a poor imitation of the signature I had used on our marriage license. I turned to look at him. "I didn't sign this, Julian," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous register. "You did. You forged my signature to move money out of the company accounts because you thought I was just a silent partner. You thought I would never check the ledgers. You thought the little wife was too busy gardening to notice $500,000 missing over the last year." Julian opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at the signature on the screen, then at his own hands. He was caught. There was no spinning this. There was no marketing jargon that could explain away a felony. "And where did that money go?" I asked, rhetorically. I clicked the remote again. A split screen appeared. On one side the withdrawal, on the other side a series of invoices. Luxury car rental, designer jewelry, a down payment on a condo in the Gold Coast district, and the name on the condo deed, Jessica Miller. I looked down at the audience, searching for the red dress. I found her. She was sobbing now, her face buried in her hands. She knew it was over. The condo was gone. The money was gone. The job was gone. "You stole from my company to buy your mistress a life you couldn't afford," I said. "You didn't just cheat on me, Julian. You stole from me. You bit the hand that fed you, and you used the money to buy a diamond collar for the woman you cheated with." I turned back to Julian. He was slumped against the podium, defeated. The arrogance was completely extinguished. He looked like a child who had broken a vase and was waiting for the punishment. But I wasn't his mother. I was his employer, and I was his victim. "You are not a visionary, Julian," I said, my voice echoing with finality. "You are not a genius. You are an employee, a bad employee. You are a figurehead I put in place because I didn't want the media attention. I let you play king. I let you sit on the throne. But never forget who built the castle." I took a step back, distancing myself from him physically and emotionally. "You are fired effective immediately," I declared. "The board has already met. I held the meeting in the car on the way here. We voted unanimously to remove you. Security will escort you out. Your company phone has been deactivated. Your company car has been towed. And as for your golden parachute," I pointed at the screen where the forged signature loomed large, "I think you used it to weave a noose for yourself. That forgery is a federal crime, Julian. The police are waiting in the lobby." Julian looked up at me. There were tears in his eyes now. Real tears of fear. "Victoria, please." He begged, his voice a broken whisper that the microphone picked up perfectly. "We can talk about this. I am your husband." I looked at him. I looked at the man I had loved, the man I had supported, the man who had mocked me an hour ago. I reached up and unclipped the microphone from the stand, holding it like a weapon. "You were my husband," I said. "Now you are just a defendant." I signaled to the security guards, "Get him out of my sight." The heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom swung open with a force that rattled the hinges. It wasn't the arrival of late guests or more waiters with trays of hors d'oeuvres. It was a phalanx of men and women in dark navy windbreakers with yellow bold lettering across the chest that read FBI Financial Crimes Division, followed closely by uniformed Chicago police officers. They moved with the synchronized precision of a military unit, cutting through the stunned silence of the crowd like a knife through water. I stood on the stage watching them approach. I had timed this perfectly. My legal team, led by the formidable Eleanor Vance, had been waiting in the lobby for exactly 7 minutes, waiting for my signal. The signal had been the projection of the forged signature. That was the smoking gun that turned a corporate dispute into a federal crime scene. Julian watched them come. His face went from pale to a sickly shade of gray. He looked at the officers, then back at me, then out at the audience, searching desperately for an ally. His eyes landed on the front row. "Darius, help me!" he screamed. His voice was raw, stripping away all pretense of dignity. "You are a lawyer. Do something. Tell them this is a mistake. Tell them she is crazy. She hacked the system, Darius. She is framing me." I looked down at Darius. My brother-in-law was sitting calmly at the head table. He placed his linen napkin on the table, smoothing it out with deliberate care. He took a sip of water. Then slowly he stood up. Julian let out a sob of relief. "Thank God," he babbled. "Darius, tell them. Tell them I am the CEO. Tell them they can't touch me without a warrant." Darius adjusted his cufflinks. He buttoned his midnight blue tuxedo jacket. He looked every inch the high-powered attorney he was. He stepped away from the table, but he didn't walk toward the police to intercept them, and he didn't walk toward Julian to comfort him. He walked toward the stairs. He walked toward me. The room held its breath. Was he going to defend his family? Was he going to attack me for ruining his brother-in-law's life? Darius climbed the stairs, his footsteps steady and heavy. He walked past Julian. He didn't even look at him. It was as if Julian was already a ghost, a non-entity. Darius walked straight up to me and extended his hand. I took it. His grip was firm, warm, and respectful. "I have been waiting for this day," Victoria Darius said, his voice low, but amplified by the microphone I was still holding. I knew the quarterly reports didn't add up. I knew the overhead costs were inflated by 300%, but I couldn't prove it without the raw data. He looked at the screen behind us, where the evidence of Julian's theft was still glowing in high definition. "This is masterful," he said. "The forensic trail is impeccable. You didn't just catch him, Victoria. You buried him." "Thank you, Darius," I said simply. "I appreciate you respecting the facts over the family ties." Darius turned slowly to face Julian. Julian looked like he had been slapped. His mouth hung open, his eyes wide with betrayal. "Darius," he whispered, "how could you? You are family." Darius looked at him with eyes that were cold and hard. "I am an officer of the court, Julian." Darius said, his voice cutting through the room like a gavel. "And you are a liability. You didn't just steal from your wife, you stole from the investors. You exposed this entire family to a RICO investigation." Darius took a step closer to Julian, leaning in so his words would be burned into Julian's memory. "I am not your lawyer tonight, Julian. I am a witness. And as a lawyer who knows exactly how much evidence Victoria has just displayed on that screen, I am going to give you the only piece of free advice you will ever get from me again." The police were on the stage now, surrounding Julian. "Keep your mouth shut," Darius ordered. "Do not say a word. Do not try to explain. Every word you speak right now is just another nail in your coffin." Darius turned back to me, nodded once in respect, and walked off the stage. He went back to his seat, sat down, and poured himself another glass of wine. He was done with Julian. The family had severed the limb to save the body. The lead FBI agent stepped forward. He was a tall man with a face carved from granite. He didn't look at the crowd, he looked only at Julian. "Julian Bennett," he said, his voice flat and professional, "you are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and aggravated identity theft." He pulled a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. The sound of the metal ratcheting shut around Julian's wrists echoed through the microphone. Click, click. It was the loudest sound in the world. Julian started to struggle. It was a weak, pathetic thrashing. "No," he shouted. "You can't do this. I am the CEO. I am the founder. Victoria, tell them. Tell them it was a loan. I was going to pay it back." I watched him. I watched the man who had told me an hour ago that I was useless. I watched the man who had treated me like a servant. I watched him being manhandled by two agents, forced to his knees. I felt nothing. No sadness, no joy. Just the clinical satisfaction of a surgeon who has successfully removed a tumor. The agent began to read him his Miranda rights. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." While Julian was being secured, another pair of officers moved toward the side of the stage. They were heading for the shadows. They were heading for Jessica. She tried to run. I saw her hike up her sequined dress and try to slip through the side exit door. But a female officer was faster. She stepped in front of Jessica, blocking her path. "Jessica Miller," the officer said loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "We have a warrant for your phone and laptop regarding the receipt of stolen funds. Do not leave the premises." Jessica screamed. It was a high, piercing sound of a child who realizes the game is over. "But I didn't steal anything," she wailed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "He gave it to me. Julian gave it to me. I didn't know. I am just the assistant." I spoke into the microphone one last time, addressing her across the room. "Ignorance is not a defense for tax evasion. Jessica, I said, my voice calm and deadly. And looking at the audit trail, you weren't just an assistant. You were an accomplice. Jessica looked at me with hatred, but beneath the hate was terror. She slumped against the wall, sobbing uncontrollably as the officer took her phone from her trembling hand. I turned back to Julian. The agents had hauled him to his feet. He was weeping now, tears soaking the collar of his expensive tuxedo shirt. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Victoria, please," he choked out. "I am sorry. I will fix it. Just tell them to stop. We are married. You can't let them take me to prison. I am your husband." I walked over to him. I stopped just inches away. I looked into his eyes, searching for the man I had married 5 years ago. But that man was gone. Maybe he never existed. Maybe he was just a projection of my own hopes. I reached out and gently straightened his bow tie, which had gone crooked in the struggle. It was a gesture of intimacy that made him freeze with hope. "I gave you a chance to be a decent husband, Julian," I said softly, so only he and the microphone could hear. "I gave you a company. I gave you a home. I gave you my patience. But you didn't want a partner. You wanted a servant. And you didn't want a wife. You wanted a trophy." I pulled my hands away from his tie, as if touching him had dirtied them. "You chose to be a criminal," I said. "You chose to be a liar. And tonight you chose to humiliate the wrong woman." I looked at the agent. "Take him away!" "No!" Julian screamed as they began to drag him toward the exit. "Victoria! Victoria!" His screams faded as the heavy doors swallowed him and the agents. The room was silent again. 500 people sat frozen, staring at the empty space where the CEO had stood. I stood alone on the stage. The spotlight was still on me. I looked out at the crowd. I saw the faces of the people who had snubbed me. The receptionist Tiffany was standing by the door, her hand over her mouth. The investors were looking at their shoes, afraid to make eye contact. Eleanor, my mother-in-law, was sitting in her chair, staring blankly at the tablecloth, her face a mask of shock. They were terrified of me, and that was good. I didn't apologize for the scene. I didn't explain myself. I didn't ask for their understanding. I simply turned off the microphone and placed it gently on the podium. I walked down the stairs. The crowd parted. It wasn't a polite shuffling. It was a desperate scramble to get out of my way. Men in tuxedos pulled their chairs in. Women in ball gowns stepped back, pressing themselves against the walls. They looked at me with a mixture of fear and awe. They were looking at the true power in the room. I walked down the center aisle. My head was high. My steps were measured. I walked past Darius, who raised his glass to me in a silent salute. I walked past the table where I had sat alone in the back. I reached the double doors. The valet was waiting there holding my coat. He looked nervous. "Your car is ready, Mrs. Bennett," he stammered. I stopped. I looked at him. I smiled, a genuine warm smile that seemed to confuse him. "It is Ms. Sterling," I corrected him gently. I took my coat and stepped out into the cold Chicago night. The air was biting, but it felt fresh. It felt clean. It felt like freedom. Behind me, the ballroom was in chaos. The company was in ruins. My marriage was over. But as I looked at the city skyline glittering in the distance, I knew one thing for sure. I had never been richer. It has been exactly 6 months since the gala, and the name Bennett Tech has been scraped off the glass doors of the headquarters. The building is now home to Sterling Innovations. The atmosphere inside is unrecognizable. Gone are the days of fear and whispering in the hallways. Gone are the sycophants who spent their days stroking Julian's ego instead of doing their jobs. I fired the entire executive board the morning after the arrest. It was a clean sweep, a necessary purge to remove the infection that had nearly killed the company. In their place, I hired a team of diverse, brilliant professionals who respect leadership based on competence, not volume. I was standing in my new office, which used to be Julian's. I had the dark, oppressive mahogany furniture removed and replaced with sleek, modern glass and light oak. The room finally felt like it could breathe. My assistant knocked softly on the open door. It was not Jessica. It was Sarah, a 50-year-old woman with impeccable organizational skills and zero interest in drama. She handed me a tablet. "The quarterly projections are in Ms. Sterling," she said with a warm smile. "We are up 40% since the rebranding. The investors are extremely happy." "Thank you, Sarah," I said, taking the tablet. I looked at the numbers. They were green. They were healthy. It turns out that when you stop siphoning millions of dollars into shell accounts and start investing in your product, the company actually grows. It was a simple concept that Julian never understood. Speaking of Julian, I received a letter today. It came in a plain white envelope stamped with the seal of the Illinois Department of Corrections. I didn't open it immediately. I let it sit on my desk while I finished my morning tea. When I finally slid it open, the handwriting was barely legible. It was the scrawl of a desperate man. He wrote that he was sorry. He wrote that he missed the house. He wrote that prison was cold and that he was being bullied by the other inmates. He asked for money for his commissary account. He asked me to talk to the judge before his sentencing hearing next week. He still thought he could manipulate me. He still thought that if he said the right words, I would revert to the quiet, obedient wife. I shredded the letter. I didn't send money. I didn't call his lawyer. I did, however, send a statement to the court recommending the maximum sentence for financial fraud. Julian is currently facing 10 to 15 years in federal prison. The lawsuits from the investors have stripped him of everything. His personal accounts are frozen. His car was auctioned off. Even his collection of vintage watches, which he prized more than our marriage, was seized to pay back the creditors. He is bankrupt. He is alone. And he is going to spend the next decade thinking about the woman he called useless while he sits in a 6x8 cell. As for Jessica, her fall was faster and perhaps more public. Darius told me the news over lunch yesterday. Darius has been handling the civil suits against the co-conspirators. He told me that Jessica's fiancé, Brad, called off the wedding the morning the news broke. Apparently, Brad didn't like finding out that his future wife was funding their honeymoon with stolen money. He left her and he took the dog. But it got worse for her. Because I had filed a formal complaint with the ethics board, Jessica was blacklisted from every major corporation in the state. No reputable company would touch a candidate with a pending federal investigation for embezzlement. The last Darius heard, she was working under the table at a dive bar on the outskirts of the city, trying to save enough money to pay her legal fees. She had lost her condo. She had lost her reputation. She had lost the false future she tried to build on the ruins of my life. I walked over to the window of my office, looking out at the Chicago skyline. The city looked different from up here. It looked brighter. For years I had looked at this view and felt like a prisoner trapped in a golden cage of my own making. Now I owned the view. I packed my bag and left the office early. I didn't have to ask for permission. I didn't have to rush home to cook dinner for an ungrateful husband. I drove my own car to my new penthouse. It was a space I bought with my own earnings, a sanctuary of white marble and peace. I sat on the balcony wrapped in a cashmere blanket, holding a cup of rare white tea. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. It was quiet, the kind of silence that isn't empty but full. I thought about the woman I was 6 months ago, the woman in the black dress standing in the shadows holding a tray of champagne. She seemed like a stranger now, but I loved her. I loved her because she was the one who had the courage to wait. She was the one who had the discipline to stay silent when every instinct screamed to fight. Many people think that revenge is about screaming. They think it is about making a scene. But true revenge, the kind that leaves you standing tall while your enemies crumble, is about timing. It is about letting them dig their own graves while you quietly hold the shovel. Julian and Jessica made the fatal mistake of confusing my silence with weakness. They thought that because I didn't argue, I didn't know. They thought that because I didn't fight back, I couldn't hurt them. They were wrong. Never underestimate the woman standing behind the man. She sees everything. She hears everything. And while you are busy boasting about your power, she is busy consolidating hers. My silence wasn't submission. It was strategy. My silence wasn't weakness. It was the sound of me reloading. I took a sip of tea, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. I am free. I am wealthy. And most importantly, I am finally myself. I set the cup down and looked directly at you. We have reached the end of this journey, but for me, it is just the beginning. I want to know what you think. What was the moment that gave you the most satisfaction? Was it when Julian saw the forensic report on the big screen and realized his life was over? Or was it when Darius walked past his own brother-in-law to shake my hand and validate my victory? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one of them, and if this story of patience and payoff resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe. There are so many more stories to tell, and I don't want you to miss a single one. Remember, sometimes the best reaction is no reaction until it is the only reaction that matters. Stay strong and stay smart. See you in the next video.